All right, so let's go back to the next part. So we have the tentative thesis, we move on to the point of contention. Now, if you haven't fully clarified, if you haven't created a good thesis statement, a good thesis, you cannot create a point of contention that will make sense. All right? Because the point of contention disagrees with you. You pick one aspect, of which could be many. Okay, you pick one aspect that someone would disagree with you about regarding your topic. So, I'm taking the position that I believe, and I notice that I don't use first person in my thesis statement. Okay, some of you did this, but you do not want to use first person. Alright, so my point, my stance, what I'm trying to say in my thesis is that sex abuse rings very likely probably do exist in the US. There's too much evidence to suggest otherwise. Alright? So my point of contention is that one quality of this, one aspect that people use to kind of tear down the concept of child sex abuse rings existing is child testimony. Okay? So people like to point out that children's testimony has been unreliable because the children were guided or influenced too much by interviewers. So you guys probably aren't aware of this, but there have been a couple of pretty big court cases, and I guess it was probably the 1980s, very early 90s in the US, regarding children in daycares. Okay, and these cases kind of led people to think, that there were these groups that existed in the country who were abusing children. So, some of the evidence that was used to sort of tear down these cases or weaken these cases was the children's testimony. So anyway, again, the point of contention has to make sense with what you're saying up here in your thesis, okay? The point of contention has to be something that disagrees with what your stance is, all right? So once you have a really good thesis, it will be much, much easier for you to come up with a really good point of contention. Now, once you've established your point of contention, and notice mine is also one sentence only. Some of you had multiple sentences. That doesn't clarify anything. That just makes it harder to figure out what you're trying to say. So you really need to condense it down to one sentence. After you've established your point of contention, that's when you start working on the counter argument. So you have to kind of think, come up with things you think would really help you prove what the other side is saying about their point. Okay? This is really hard to do because your position is not with the other side. You don't want to agree with the counter argument. Everything in you is saying, but I don't believe that, right? So the counter argument is much more difficult to write than the refutation. So when you are creating the counter argument, you need to follow those directions that are on that previous handout, the one that comes right before this one, that explains the color coding. Okay? All of these sentences are fully explained. I talk about what they mean in the videos as well. Alright? So you want to make sure that you build your counter argument by following those directions. So I think, pretty logically, I create evidence for why the other side regarding children's testimony is correct. Okay? Children's testimony is unreliable. This is what I'm showing. I'm not going on any other tangents. I'm not talking about any other points. I'm only talking about children's testimony and anything that relates to that. Okay? So, I have to talk about, state my basic idea. Just make sure you follow the directions that are color-coded in the other handout. And so everything that I provide here, not only does it match up with the directions of the color coding, it also ties in directly with children's testimony. Okay? Now, when you go to write the refutation, yes, you want to follow those directions for color coding, but you also want to make sure that you are addressing points that are addressed in the counter argument. You don't want to leave anything, you don't want to leave any point neglected, because if you do that in the refutation, you're missing an opportunity to enhance your argument, to strengthen your argument. And somebody might think, oh, well, he or she doesn't have a response to that, so they must not have found any evidence, which just leaves a big gaping hole in your support. Okay, so do go back and look at your counter argument after you've created, or as you create the refutation. Go back and look at what you wrote for the counter argument and make sure that you are in fact addressing everything point by point that you talked about in the counter argument. And I think I pretty much do that here. The evidence that I talk about in the refutation sort of undercuts any evidence that is used to support the other side in the counter argument. Okay, so you do want to make sure that you have evidence that comes back and shows that your stance is stronger, that you have a reason for believing what you believe, without resorting to calling the other side stupid, or name calling, or using really weak arguments, flawed arguments. You want to make sure you actually have evidence that outweighs what the other side says. Okay. And I noticed that some of you also, you gave a works cited page, which is fantastic. In my creation of this, I didn't get to that point, and I decided to just stop and not do that on my own counter argument refutation, just to instruct you guys to do that. So again, make sure that you look at the it would not be enough for me to just give the web addresses. I would have to create an actual works cited entry. But make sure that you do look at the MLA section of the Prentice Hall Reference Guide, because some of you, I noticed in your other assignment, your research cards, you are actually using you're using APA. Okay, so make sure that you're looking exactly at the MLA section instead of APA or some other style. All right. Okay, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to point out to you as far as directions for this. Some of my sections, the parts that are color-coded look really long, and that's okay for me, because I understand what I'm trying to accomplish in each section. But if yours is not quite as long as this, that's fine. Just make sure you have each of the parts. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers what I want to say about the extended directions for this. Make sure that you look at this when you're trying to revise your assignment, which most of you, I would say all of you, will have to do.